without further ado, I give you Roger Horrocks.
Yeah, kia ora, thank you, Tyler, and hello folks. I thought we'd maybe just start with a very brief taste of All Souls Carnival, not the exhibition this time, but the film. So if we could just have a taste. Everybody can see and hear okay? So if I could have a bit more light, that would be good. Yeah, thank you. Somebody who's a major artist, which is the kind of genius who turns up once in a blue moon, has a different sort of career. It's common for an artist to come up with a new idea, but then spend many years producing variations on that idea. In contrast, a major artist will have a big idea, then get restless and have another idea and another one. And the ideas will be linked at a deep level, but they'll look startlingly different when we first see them. And I think Len Lye is a classic example, as this wide-ranging exhibition that is about to open will demonstrate. First of all, he made both kinetic sculptures and films, though his work in those different media is linked at a deep level by his passion for movement. And even within his filmmaking, he never stopped experimenting. He had the idea of direct or cameraless filmmaking in his early 30s, and the result was the epoch-making, hand-painted colour box. But by the time he made his second direct film, just a year later, Kaleidoscope, he was already trying something new. He was using stencils rather than hand painting. Then in trade tattoo, he worked with found footage. In colour cry, he developed another direct technique, which he called the shadow cast method. We might also call it the photogram method. And then in free radicals, he did something different again. He scratched on black film and made these marvellous electrical signs that wriggle like lightning. So there already are 5 different ways of making films without a camera. And he never slowed down. His restless experimenting caused dismay to his first wife, Jane. Jane wanted Len to sort of slow down. I mean, you've come up with a wonderful idea, hang around and make some money out of it before you go on to another one, which is going to cost us more money. But Len was always on the go. If an artist is a bit slower, the audience catches up and you can make some money. But as Len put it, every film I made, I tried to do something new with the medium. When I was researching Len's life for my biography, I came across an area of direct film experiment that appeared to have been lost. In the 1950s, Len would use films as a background to live music, like a kind of forerunner to today's rock concerts. The music would not be precisely synchronized. Precise synchronization is what's called Mickey Mousing. In other words, you hit the beat, and that's basic to Walt Disney's cartoons, so it's known as Mickey Mousing. In freer forms of synchronization, there are moments of unexpected serendipity. And there's sometimes a special kind of energy to two strands which go along together but also retain their own separate character. And the dancer Merce Cunningham, if any of you ever saw Merce, the dancer Merce Cunningham was famous for that approach to the combination of music and dance. Len did this in the 1950s mostly with jazz groups at the Five-Spot Jazz Club in the Bowery, groups such as Count Basie. But he was also interested in contemporary classical music, and living near him in the West Village was a composer called Henry Brandt, a wonderfully inventive composer who later won the Pulitzer Prize for music, but at that time was under the radar. Henry Brandt admired Len for his good humour and his totally independent attitude. One day he proposed to Len that they collaborate. They decided to work independently so that the two strands would begin and end at the same time, the music and the images, and they would have a kind of family resemblance. They knew what each other was doing in terms of the kind of imagery or the kind of music, but at the level of detail, any precise synchronization was a wonderful surprise to them both. So that's what I've described as the Merce Cunningham approach. Both the music and the images were very busy, so there were bound to be lots of interesting coincidences, but not in a Mickey Mouse style. Rather than make a film, they decided they wanted a live performance. Henry Brandt felt that Len's images were so bright and vibrant that it was best for the music to be played live. In his words, I wanted the organic sound of acoustic music. For the performance, which happened in the Carnegie Recital Hall in 1957, 3rd of March, the lights were turned off and Len's film was back projected onto a highly luminous screen behind the 5 musicians. Brandt's music was a suite, All Souls Carnival, with 6 movements, which incorporated some ideas from earlier works he'd written for dance groups. And dance is, of course, a way of describing all forms of Len's art that moves. The work was scored for piano, flute, violin, and cello, plus the surprise addition of a piano accordion. The music made colourful use of each instrument with quick changes of tempo and a wry sense of humour. All Souls Day is known in Mexico as the Day of the Dead, and it's a day when the ghosts come out and party. So it's kind of like Halloween, only more so. As for Len, he wanted to try a new kind of imagery he had just developed. He called it, quote, rhapsodic, based on lacquer paints and felt tip marker pens, a new invention which delighted him. He also created complex patterns of dots in wet dye by using a rubber pad with bristles, the kind of pad found next to cash registers in New York, from which customers picked up their change. The typical Len Lye invention. It became a tool for the making of direct films. His washes, blobs, and bands of colour were in line with the new styles of abstraction being created by younger painters who had followed on from the New York school. Painters like Sam Francis, Helen Frankenthaler, and Philip Guston. They liked bright colours and thinner paint which soaked into the canvas. And on this occasion, Len painted more freely than usual down the strip of film, 16mm film, so the images were not so frame-specific. They were also more fluid, and boy, did they go. They changed much more rapidly than usual. Reviewing the Carnegie concert, the New York Herald Tribune reported, quote, that Len's film was quite ravishing. Its iridescent shapes and forms are burst with vivid colours, and no less vivid were the sonorities conjured up by Mr. Brandt to assist the images as they danced by. The New York Times observed that the music and the film were not indissolubly synchronized, but in combination they made an effect which by turns was charming, poignant, playful, and often faintly mocking. Henry Brandt recalled that he'd taken his 4-year-old daughter, and she'd loved the colour and movement of Len's film. And after the concert, her way of describing the images to her mother was to make sort of Len Lye type movements of her arms up and down. The work had one other performance at Bennington College in Vermont where Henry Brant was teaching. Then Len put it back on the shelf and moved restlessly onto another experiment, which happened to be free radicals. And I think he may have also screened bits of All Souls separately, because the film was broken up into separate reels of film with titles like Henry's Paint and Carnegie Abstracts. To my knowledge, Len never completed a film as a release print with a soundtrack that would have served as a definitive record of this rhapsodic style of direct film. In December 1995, I managed to go behind the scenes of the film archive at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and I was excited there to come across a box of uncatalogued films by Len. And when I spooled through them, I found versions of Carnegie Abstracts, Henry's Paint, and other material of that kind. So I thought, hey, maybe I can reconstruct All Souls Carnival, which was a film I had always wanted to see. Archives prefer to deal with fellow archives, so I got the New Zealand Film Archive to request a copy of the footage from the Museum of Modern Art. And this took several years of negotiation, but the material finally arrived, and I set out to reconstruct the original 16-minute film. I obtained a copy of the music from Henry Brant in California. My wife Shirley and I visited Henry, a lovely guy, very enthusiastic about Len, had lovely memories, and he thought it was a good idea to try and reconstruct the film. But doing so proved to be quite a workout, because some of the footage had deteriorated and some sequences were fragmentary, so it was a real jigsaw puzzle. But I was reassured by knowing that Len and Henry had never intended the film to be precisely synchronized. So if the original order had been A, B, C, D, E, and I didn't know what the order was, so I might come out with, with D, A, B, C, E, it didn't matter, because the film was that experience in each live performance being different. Once I'd done a paper edit, Annie Collins came in to splice the pieces together smoothly. This was very kind of Annie. She was working on the editing of Lord of the Rings, but in her spare time she came along and did a little bit of tidying up on the editing. And like all of us involved with the project, she donated her time. So I was grateful. Also, the Film Archive was wonderfully helpful and supportive through all phases of this process. My first version of All Souls Carnival ran for 16 minutes, and it covered all 6 movements of the suite. But after I'd given the film a couple of screenings, I made the decision to drop the last 5 minutes because they were in marginal condition physically, and I'd just come to feel uncomfortable watching them. So the final version is 11 minutes long and covers 4 of the 6 of Henry's movements. This was an agonizing decision to make, but I felt that the main point of the exercise was to say, look, here is a new area of experiment that Len did. There's no other record of it, so this at least will be a representative taste. There's a limit to what you can do with film restoration unless you have unlimited time and millions of dollars, and we certainly didn't have that. I sent a copy to Henry, and he said he couldn't remember the film exactly, it was too many years ago, but he thought the reconstruction had the right feel, and he gave it his blessing. And in New Zealand, I was also gratified to get some positive responses. For example, the painter Max Gimlet said, "Wow, I now understand the full meaning of the phrase Len Lye film painter." The only negative responses came from a few people who found it too fast and too much of a workout for the eyes, or they didn't understand the lack of precise synchronization, the lack of Mickey Mousing. For example, an arts festival organizer, who obviously hadn't read my program notes, said he was very disappointed in the film because the images were not tightly tied in with the music. For him, animation had to be about close synchronization. So from such responses, you can understand the pressure on an artist like Len Lye not to experiment too much. The film is certainly a workout. You have to accept its speed and go with it if you want to enter its world and share its intensity. I like to think of different idioms of film or different idioms of art as not merely different visual styles, but also as altered states of consciousness. an alternative to drugs, so to speak. Each idiom plays the keyboard of your mind in a different way. I mean, All Souls is that kind of film. It's a completely new experience. Len understood the potential energy and jitter of direct film better than anybody before him. Previous abstract filmmakers had wanted geometrical shapes and they'd wanted precise control, the previous modernist filmmakers, like the Germans. All Souls is the most extreme example of Len exploiting the energy of the jitter of direct film. It is like orchestral music that says, don't worry about melody. We won't have melody. What we'll have is instrumental colour and orchestral texture. So it's like a different kind of music, a different kind of gestalt, a different kind of sensation stimulus, to use one of Len's phrases, a different kind of figure of motion, to use another of Len's phrases. The film now has music as a built-in soundtrack. The Film Archive has made a high-quality digital copy, and my warmest thanks to Sarah Davey for supervising that. It'll still be possible to turn off the soundtrack and stage a live performance of the music, but to date, no music group has offered to do one for us. I've just got one more insight to share before I finish. A couple of years ago, Jean-Michel Bauer, a curator at the Centre Pompidou in Paris, with whom I'd edited a book about Len Lye, curated an exhibition by the great Spanish direct filmmaker José Antonio Sistiaga, and he asked me to write an essay for the catalogue. It was the first opportunity I'd had to look closely at Sistiaga's work. I knew that his film, Ere Erira Belaidu, was regarded as a great, groundbreaking direct film. When I was sent a copy, I was astonished to see how like All Souls Carnival it was, in its speed, its lyrical style of abstraction, and its intricate textures, and the way that Sistiaga had worked down the film. Now, there were differences. He used a larger canvas. He had 35mm film, not 16. He didn't want any music. This is a silent film, and his film ran for an exhausting 78 minutes. I don't want in any way to detract from the brilliance of Sistiaga's film, and I'm sure he had never seen All Souls Carnival because it had been gathering dust in that box. But I was struck by the fact that Len had made his film 13 years before this great breakthrough that Sistiaga had made. So this reassured me of the importance of reconstructing All Souls, even though it has a few rough edges. It's another example of Len's pioneering, his extraordinary ability to open up new areas of possibility for direct film and for the art of movement in general. To finish, I'm just going to show you 1 minute of Sistiaga's film, just to give you a taste. And as I said, it's a silent film. Okay. There's quite a bit of ambient light, and you really need to see it, and also All Souls in total blackout because the colours are just so glowing and the shapes are just so marvellous in both cases. So that's the Spanish All Souls Carnival 30 years after Len's. Thank you.